The American Friends Service Committee hosted a day-long event to hold a timely and significant conversation about the effects of trauma caused by the criminal justice system on our families and on our communities.
So the goal of blurring the boundaries was really to disrupt the binary between how we understand victims and offenders. Oftentimes they're the same population. So it's really to have a more nuanced conversation around trauma, especially the trauma that extends from the criminal justice system.
Attendees included directly impacted people, service providers, members of the legal system, and educators.
Our criminal justice system is primarily adversarial. There are winners and there are losers. And so it really only works if we are able to put people in one box or the other. What we know is that trauma is something that is a thread that runs throughout that system and impacts people in a myriad of ways. And by taking the focus on this common experience that many of us have of trauma and asking questions about healing harm, the hope is that we can remove some of that adversarial, political rhetoric and really get to the heart of the matter.
Language is really powerful. So with our words, we construct and we can deconstruct. And the same is true for the labels that we impose upon people when they have interfaced with the system. They're very stigmatizing. And if we want people to come out of the system and be able to reintegrate into their communities, we need to view them and speak of them as people.
As prisons show perhaps most clearly, the social conditions for producing trauma are built into our institutions and practices. One might say that the contemporary U.S. is, writ large, traumatogenic. We are in the business, and I mean that quite literally, of creating trauma in huge swaths of the population. Trauma is useful for the expansion of the rehabilitation industrial complex, recovery, and it's certainly useful and profitable for the prison industrial complex.
So Rikers is now widely recognized as a human rights atrocity, a place where violence and victimization are embedded into the fabric of the institution. Detainees are routinely subjected to abuse at the hands of other incarcerated people and the guards. Last year alone, New York spent $13 million settling claims of abuse and wrongful death. And that's a cost in dollars and in human lives that's shameful for a city like New York and a country like America. Rikers is a symbol of the worst dysfunction of our criminal justice system. It's a place where the cycle of harm is reinforced and exacerbated rather than interrupted and calmed. One of the most difficult things to do as a community is to take ownership of the ways in which we have failed our neighbors, some of whom get labeled victims and some of whom get labeled offenders, and reimagine a system of justice that doesn't treat those categories as mutually exclusive, but instead seek to make all people whole.
Glenn Martin talked about the principle that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. How do you see victims or survivors being a part of this in our community in order to help heal some of the trauma that has been experienced by both parties? We wanted to give people the opportunity to reflect on the content of the day and to do it in a small group atmosphere so that they could have open and honest conversations and think critically about the content that they had taken in throughout the day.
We're really conscious about this unfortunate tendency in many of these environments, in academic environments and conferences, where the people who are directly impacted by a problem become the sideshow. They're the sob story, they come up and they tell their story, and then everybody says, oh, that's so sad, what happened to you? Now the grown-ups are gonna go in the other room and talk about the solution. That is a fundamental problem in how we have these discussions, and it simply reinforces all of the issues that undergird why the system doesn't work.
So if we want to reduce harm in our communities and we want to have safe and healthy communities, then we need to address trauma.